and welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the place to be if you are a sci-fi or fantasy reader. My name is Laura and I am your host. I am a reader, writer, and whiskey drinker, here to share with you the person behind the page, the author. And today's featured author is Candace Kade, and today is a very, very special day for Candace because today is the release of her debut novel, Enhanced. This is book one in the hybrid series, and this is the book that we're going to be talking about today in this episode. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Candace. Candace grew up in China and currently lives in Austin, Texas. When she's not missing Chinese food, she's busy writing, exploring new countries, volunteering, hiking in national parks, teaching her husband Mandarin, and keeping a baby human alive. I absolutely love that little author blurb, short and sweet and to the point, and we dive in a little bit more about her background in this episode, so stay tuned. And like I said, today we're going to be talking about her book Enhanced, so this is what it's all about. Lee Urban is living a lie. In a society where everyone's DNA determines their destiny, being a natural means automatic relegation to the gritty and dangerous outskirts. With the harnessed power of gene editing, the ability to create a superhuman race has transformed the world and offered the opportunity of a genetically enhanced life, but only to those who can afford it. Born a natural, Lee Urban was adopted into the enhanced high society of the Asian Federation and forced to conceal her genetic roots. When her dream of attending Peking University becomes a reality, she is determined to go despite a warning from a mysterious source. Targeted by a hacker bent on exposing her true DNA, Urban faces off with an artificial intelligence game that puts her and her lies to the test. What was supposed to be a dream come true turns into a lethal gamble of hide and seek with her genetics. Can Urban continue the act, or will the cracks in her story expose her and endanger her family? This was such a fun read. I actually received an advanced reader copy of her book. And I'm so excited to see the next book in this series because I was hooked in. I read it so quickly, and it kind of gives a little bit of vibes. I mean, we talk about in the interview, I'm not even going to tell you now, but it gives some vibes of some other books. Let's just put it at that. Let's dive into the interview. Hello and welcome to Read It with Whiskey. I'm so excited to have you on the show, Candace. How's your day going so far?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yes, me too. I absolutely loved your book, Enhanced. This is book one of the hybrid series, and we're going to talk all about it today. And before we started recording, talk about those spoilers. There's so much that happens in this book. So we're going to do our best not to give away everything. Before we talk about the book, I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you began your writing career.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long journey. I did not start off just loving reading and writing. It was actually a bit of a battle. My mom was teaching me reading and writing at the time because we were living in China. And I actually promised her I will never need to know how to read or write. And she still quotes me on that today. But eventually she prevailed and taught me how to read and write. And as soon as I learned how, I loved it. And I just started reading all sorts of novels and started writing my own, terrible mystery novels that I never finished. But it wasn't until high school that two things happened. One, I just started writing more seriously. But two, I read the book Aragon. I'm not sure if you've read it, but I was 16 at the time, and the author, was 15, and that just blew my mind. I'm also very competitive, and so I thought, if a 15-year-old can do this, I should be able to do this. And so I started out seriously writing in high school and just fell in love with it. It felt like magic writing. Granted, it took forever and years, to get that first novel. But as soon as I started doing it seriously, I just absolutely fell in love with it.
I didn't know you had started writing so young. So this is your first book that you are publishing, though, correct?
This is my debut novel, correct.
Okay. So do you have any other that you might go back to and publish later on down the road? Or are all those just in the trash?
No. So I know everyone says you should trash your first novel, but I love my first novel. It's the epic fantasy trilogy. And it's been rewritten so many times, and it still needs work, probably another rewrite. But I still love that fantasy novel and that trilogy. So someday I will go back to that. And then there's also a contemporary series that is on the back burner as well that I absolutely love and I would love to go back to. So many projects kind of floating around. Right now, it's just heads down finishing the trilogy. But after that, who knows?
I love that. You wrote fantasy. Now you have enhanced, and this is definitely more on that sci-fi spectrum, but you also have contemporary. You're just all over the place. I love it.
That's so funny. I never thought that would happen. I was such a big fantasy lover. I was like, I'm going to write fantasy for the rest of my life. And I don't think I even realized I was writing sci-fi when I wrote Enhanced until someone was like, oh, a sci-fi novel. I was like, oh, it is sci-fi because it's very near future. It's not a space opera. It's almost closer to dystopian or cyberpunk. Yep. But so for me, I was very surprised. I had never thought I would branch out in sci-fi, much less contemporary. What is happening? I don't know. I love fantasy, so I love a lot of things.
Yeah, there's definitely a few fantasy nuggets within Enhanced, but I really enjoyed it because I love dystopian. My series is science fiction post-apocalyptic, and it's definitely that dystopian vibe. And so with Enhanced, it's kind of dystopian, but also utopian, which we'll get into that in just a few minutes. So Enhanced, this is your first debut novel. And as this episode goes out, March 14th, 2023, this is release day. So we're thinking in the future, but it's also the present as people listen to it. We're like time hopping here. How do you feel? Your book has released today.
Oh my gosh, it's surreal. After so long having this dream as a high schooler, it's absolutely surreal. I'm so excited.
Yes. Oh, I love it. So tell us, what is this book all about?
Yeah. So Enhanced is based off of CRISPR gene editing technology, which if you don't know what that is, definitely go Google it. There's going to be a long rabbit trail of interesting findings probably. But so it's taking that and asking, what if CRISPR were to actually take off in the future? What would our society look like? And so it's a story about Urban, who is someone who doesn't have any genetic enhancements. She's actually born naturally, but she's adopted into the Asian Federation High Society of Genetically Enhanced. And so she actually has to hide her lack of enhancements because there's a lot of prejudice towards naturals. And so she has this dream of becoming an artisan and joining the artisan gene pool, but it's very tricky for her because she doesn't have those genetic enhancements. And if people were to discover who she really is, it's very dangerous. And so it's actually really cool. I was able to plant a couple of Easter eggs throughout the book, working with my cover designer and my typesetter. And so actually, if you look at the main cover, this theme is actually on the main cover. So you'll notice there's several sets of Chinese characters. And to the left of Urban, there's 4 characters that are actually a Chinese Chenyu or a Chinese saying. And it says 水落石出, which means as the water recedes, the rocks begin to show. And so it's sort of like, if you're at the beach, as the tide's going out, you begin to see what was there. And it's talking about, as more and more facts come out, the truth will eventually come to light. And that's very much what Urban is dealing with as she's in this web of lies and hoping they don't catch up to her. And so it's this theme of identity and trying to hide her physical genetic identity, but also wrestling with who is she actually? She kind of straddles these two worlds of the enhanced and naturals, and sort of she isn't really sure where she belongs. In the enhanced society, she's grown up there. She knows everyone. She knows what to do, but she's constantly hiding who she really is genetically. And she sort of feels like a fraud. But then when she goes to the outskirts with the naturals, where, her DNA does actually belong, she hasn't grown up there. And so she doesn't feel like she belongs either. And so it's a theme of belonging, and something that, is a theme I very much have wrestled with growing up in China and then returning to the US. Very similar experience. My parents moved to China when I was 4 years old, and I attended local Chinese school part-time and was homeschooled part-time. And at Chinese school, I wore the uniform that they wore. I ate the same food. I rode my bike. We all lived in the same neighborhood. But foreigners at the time in China, this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, foreigners were very rare, especially where I grew up in Chengdu. And so a lot of people would always stare at me, and I always felt like I don't quite belong because I don't look Chinese, but I feel like I should belong because I've lived here my whole life. And then, when I moved to the US for university, it was the opposite scenario of, okay, I look like I could belong here. And technically my passport is from the US, but I've never lived here. I haven't spent time here. I speak English, and my parents did a great job of trying to, teach us about American culture and the holidays and all of that. But there is still a lot of gaps in my education that, you just can't have that when you're living in a foreign country. And so I felt like in both instances, I was like, where do I belong? I'm not quite sure. And so it's a theme that you see reflected in Urban as she's straddling these two worlds of the enhanced and naturals and feeling like, where do I actually belong in this society? So it's a book about belonging, home, as well as identity, but there's also just a lot of crazy world building, AI games, advanced tech thrown in as well.
That was an incredible summary. And I love hearing about your own history and growing up. And I couldn't imagine, because I have lived in the States my whole life. I hardly have gone out of the country, unfortunately. I want to in the future. It's just so exciting for me to hear the stories that you just told, right? About people moving and how it actually gets implemented into the books as well. And that was actually going to be one of my questions. What was the inspiration for the story? But I think you just answered that pretty well. So
I will say there's another piece of inspiration as well, which was getting to go back to China as an adult. I'd visited many times through college, but a couple years ago, the company I was working for sent me on a relocation assignment to Beijing. And so that's actually when I wrote Enhanced, was when I was in Beijing. And getting to go back after so many years, that's where so much of the inspiration came from, because even the technology had changed so much from when I had grown up there. Mm-hmm. Growing up, everyone just used cash. Things were very, I guess I would think of them as normal. Whereas when I returned to Beijing, people didn't even use cash anymore. They all use their phones. They use WeChat to pay for things. Just so much had changed technologically that kind of also made me begin to think, what will the future look like? And so that's sort of when I made the connection. I'd always wanted to write a book set in China since I had grown up there, or based loosely off of Asian culture, I should say. But when I was living in Beijing and just seeing how much everything had changed, that's when I realized, the story that I was going to tell, which I'd always thought would be fantasy, because I love fantasy. It actually needs to be this CRISPR gene editing technology book that's just been kind of sitting in the back of my brain for a long time, because there's just so much technology that's changing. And I want to see an Asian society that's set in the future, because I haven't really read a lot of books like that. And I'm just surrounded by so much inspiration, even just at my office. We were at an office in downtown Beijing, and we're in the middle of a high rise. And so I could go down during my lunch break or to get a coffee, and there would just be people everywhere. Like, picture downtown New York, Times Square. Like, that's the number of people that would just be passing by our office. And so a lot of Enhance was actually written in a coffee shop and a bakery that would just have this floor to ceiling window. And I would just sit there with my coffee and then just watch people go by and write Enhance. It sounds very inspirational and awesome, but that was actually a very challenging time in my life. So it's not as glamorous as it sounds. Working in my second language after, 10 years of living in the US was also very, very challenging. So if it sounds like the glamorous high life, don't believe that at all.
No, we all need those challenges and trials. And especially when we're writing books, I feel like it puts more into the story if you're going through something personally. So within this book, you already kind of talked about it. There are different types of people. There are the enhanced and there are the naturals. And like I talked about earlier, it's kind of like a dystopian, utopian future, because these enhanced people, they have advanced electronics, the gene manipulation, the utopia for them. But then the lower class, the naturals, it's definitely dystopian. It's more difficult. So tell us a little bit about creating that world and how you decided what went into each side of society.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with naturals, it was thinking more about technology and artificial intelligence and what does that look like? Because, I think there's so much fear, even today, around AIs taking our jobs and what are we going to do? And there's a lot of fear around that. And I think, just like any technological advancement, there are concerns, but there's also a lot of good that can come out of it. And so I wanted to show a society that wasn't purely the bots are evil, the AI has taken over. I didn't want to just show that. But I also didn't want to show the society that was perfect because technology had just perfected our lives. And so I wanted to show a society that had both, because I think that's our world today. We have technology that's used for both good and evil. And so for the naturals, it's very much become just a grind. And they're stuck in these artificial intelligent roles where they're teaching the AI, training the AI. And it's just a slog. It's long hours. It's just terrible. It's not very much fun for them at all. But in the enhanced society, they have all this amazing technology and they can have the cutting edge technology that enhances their lives. And it's able to give them a better lifestyle. So I wanted to show a world in which technology can do both.
Definitely. And there's a big concept to society called the SOSH rating. So this idea of a SOSH, and you have to have a certain number in order to be accepted into certain areas of society, essentially. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I actually call it SOSH, but it can go either way. Okay. I personally call it SOSH. But yeah, it was interesting because when I was moving to Beijing was right around when China was releasing their social credit score. That hasn't really taken off. It exists in some degrees, but there is a lot of fear, just like AI, a lot of fear of what is this going to look like? Are we going to be tracked everywhere we go? Are we going to have these scores that follow us around? And so it was taking that and looking at, okay, if people did have a social score that dictated where they could buy a house or what sort of job they could apply to, or even just who wants to be friends with you, what would that look like? And so for Urban, it plays a huge part in the story because, she's trying to keep her head down. She's trying to blend in as a natural, not attract too much attention. But then on the other hand, she needs to get a high social score in order to become an artisan, in order to achieve these dreams. And so it's a very fine line that she's trying to balance and walk of, okay, I need a high social score, but also I need to fit in and I don't want to attract too much attention. So it's very much a balancing act for her. And it's very much something that dictates kind of your happiness in a sense for some people. If your SOSH zeroes out, you're going to be destitute. You're going to be homeless. People are not going to want to be your friend. You're going to be a beggar on the side of the street. So it's also something that you do have to pay attention to because it can have devastating consequences if it were to zero out.
And I just got it. SOSH. That's why it's pronounced that way.
A lot of people say SOSH. You're totally fine.
I love the concept of it, though, because they have this technology where they can essentially see things that aren't there. And you can see the scores and you can learn about people just by looking at them and reading their score and their history and all these things about them. And I loved that concept of electronics and just the enhancements that they are able to have in this world, which was so cool. And it kind of reminded me of a few different books out there. And I was wondering if you had any specific books that inspired any concepts within your book.
I don't think so. I think as I was editing and rewriting, though, a lot of my critique partners were like, hey, have you ever read Warcross? Or have you ever read Cinder? Or seen the movie Gattaca? Or even the Netflix show, I think it's Black Mirror, the Swan Dive episode. So I think as I was revising, I realized, there are a couple of other books that have pieces of my story in them. But I don't think there was a book in particular that inspired it. It was mostly just that CRISPR radio show that I was listening to, years ago that really inspired it.
The reason I ask is because while I was reading your book, I had almost nostalgia moments because it would remind me of different books like Ready Player One, especially in the first few chapters when Urban's in her job, like that definitely had that Ready Player One vibe, that lower class kind of set and scene. And then also the Hunger Games with District 1 and their extravagant parties that reminded me of the enhanced side of society. And then also the Hunger Games, the games within this book. So tell us a little bit more about that. What are the games?
Yeah. So the games are like the futuristic version of, the NFL and soccer and just even nowadays, a lot of computer games are totally taking off. I think like League of Legends has a larger viewership than I think it was NFL. I'm not sure. But so there's all these people who are watching the AI games. It's like the new big thing. And it's artificial intelligence based. So you walk into the arena and the AI analyzes your genetics and what enhancements you might have, and then pits challenges based on that. And so there's like a training mode that's going to help you get better. But then there's also this entertainment mode where you can dazzle spectators. And, if you're a super, which is someone who has genetic enhancements to make you bigger and stronger, faster, basically most supers are in some sort of like military function or protection services. If you're a super and you walk into the arena, then the AI would analyze your genetics and pit you against a lot of physical obstacles that would be very challenging. So it's a new big thing. Everyone watches it. Everyone would love to compete in it. Of course, it's very competitive to get in. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And that just reminded me of the Hunger Games, and I was just nostalgia. I was like, I have to read that series again. Because obviously it's a different concept. Like, they're not trying to kill each other. They're trying to win a game. Very different, but
Yes.
Definitely same energy, same vibe. And I loved those scenes. And we're not going to talk too much about it because I think that would head a little bit too much into the spoiler territory. So we'll let everybody pick up the book and learn about the games on their own. All right. So one thing I love to ask is about characters. So who would you say is your favorite character in the series, or maybe who is your favorite to actually write?
Yeah, I think Coral, she surprised me a lot. I had very specific plans for her, and she just told me, no, I'm doing my own thing. And she was such a pain. I had a love-hate relationship with writing her. On the one hand, she was so fun, and, she's very sassy, and she's the one of the few people in the entire novel who really doesn't care about her social score, or at least she appears not to. She doesn't play all the games of linking and going to parties and trying to boost her. So she just doesn't care. And she says what she thinks, which is very rare for most of the characters. But on the other hand, she was such a pain to write because I had to totally change the ending multiple times because, her role in the book just totally changed. So I love her because she was fun to write, but I hate her because she gave me so many headaches and so many rewrites.
Oh, but those are the best characters though, because then when they're on the page, you're like, okay, I really like them, but you suck. You're difficult. But I love you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so as writers, we are readers first. So I would like to know a little bit more about your own reading styles, reading habits, things like that. So you mentioned earlier that your favorite genre to read in the past was fantasy. So is that the same now, or do you like other genres?
Yeah, it's so hard. I think I still love fantasy, and I also love sci-fi, and I also love contemporary and urban fantasy. So I have a hard time picking favorites. I love anything young adult, I think. So I think I've expanded, and if you ask me like what my favorite book is or what my favorite genre is, it's very hard for me to pick one. But basically anything YA, I probably love it.
Awesome. What was your favorite book that you read most recently?
Most recently, I think Wistress by Sarah Ella. That's the first book I've read this year, and I really love it. It's a retelling of Alice in Wonderland, which I'm not even an Alice in Wonderland fan, but I love the book. It's just mind-blowing how she's able to switch realities and just like flip things on their head. Like her creativity and mind-bending, like the way she's able to explore these worlds is just really mind-bending. So I love that book.
Oh, that sounds good. I'm gonna have to look for that one. My TBR is growing, and every time I have someone on the show, it just grows even more. All right. So how often do you read? Like, how many books did you read last year? Do you remember?
You put my TBR to shame. I know you listen to or read about 100 books a year, and I aspire to read 50 each year on Goodreads. I take the challenge of I'm going to read 50. That's going to be good for me. I usually end up reading about 30. So maybe I need to try your hybrid method because I've been learning more about that. And I'm like, maybe that would help me read more. But it just seems like such a mental obstacle because if I have a physical book, I'm like, no, I'm going to read the physical copy. I'm not switching to audio, not doing it. And usually if I have a physical copy, it's either because it's beautiful and I wanted to own such a beautiful book and I wanted to read it in my hand. Or it's because, it's self-published, it's indie, and there is no audio version in some cases.
Right.
So I find that to be quite the hurdle for me. But I need to give it a try because, wow, 100, your TBR and your reading system has very much impressed me. So I need to give it a try.
Well, thank you. Yeah, hybrid reading is a game changer. It definitely exponentially more books were able to be read because of hybrid reading. It's definitely not for everybody, though. You really got to get used to it, because if you're reading a book, you read 3 chapters and then you go and listen to a book, it can kind of change the way that you see characters, see the scene and the setting and things like this, just especially depending on who the narrator is, because their voice could completely change the perspective that you have on a character.
I didn't even think about that. That's so fascinating. Yeah, because the narrator's voice totally impacts that. And it might be a strange experience as well, because when it comes to physical books, I'm a very slow reader, which is very unfortunate. But when it comes to audiobooks, I try to make up for it by listening on the 1.5 speed. Yeah. So that might also be a very confusing experience for my brain.
You'll have to try it out and let me know. Let me know how it goes.
I will.
All right, so let's talk about what's coming next. So this is book 1 of the Hybrid series released today, March 14th, 2023. And you said it's a trilogy?
Correct.
All right, so do you have a timeline for when books 2 and 3 are going to be released, or is that kind of still secretive?
Yeah, so book 2 is going to be released March of 2024. And then book 3 the year after that. So right now, I'm just, it's all hands on deck trying to get those 2 books done.
1 book a year. It's all you need.
Yep. Keeps you busy.
Exactly. I see some authors going out and publishing like 5 or 6 books a year. And I'm like, you're crazy. I don't know how you're doing this.
I know. I don't understand. I think each year each book, I get a little bit faster in my process. So I'm hopeful that someday I could be one of those crazy fast writers, but not there yet.
And apart from the Hybrid series, do you have anything else on the back burner that you're thinking about or mulling over for the future?
Yeah, I think once I'm finished with the Hybrid series, I'll probably go back to the epic fantasy trilogy, or the contemporary. It's just a toss-up of which one. I love both of them so much, but for totally different reasons.
Right. Exactly. Oh, well, this has been great. And so it's Read It with Whiskey. It wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So, Candace, what is your favorite whiskey to drink?
So don't hate me. I'm not a big whiskey drinker. You might have to do the whiskey talking. But I love drinking tea, coffee. I make my own chai lattes that I learned when I was in India from scratch, or matcha lattes. Make my own kombucha. I drink almost everything but whiskey. Don't hate me.
No, quite all right. It's definitely an acquired taste, but I'm right there with you with the chai lattes, matcha. Oh my goodness, I love it. So it's all right. You're forgiven.
Okay.
Where can people find you and find your book and learn more about you, follow along with your journey?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, CandaceKade.com, and Candace is spelled Candace. And Kade is Kade. People always think it's Candace for some reason. I get a lot of emails addressed to Candace. I can't dance, so don't make that mistake. CandaceKade.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter and stay up to date with my progress. I also have a lot of book recommendations I send through my newsletter and giveaways of books. You can also go to social media. I'm on Instagram at Candace Kade Author. And my book is going to be all the major places. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you're international, it's actually going to be on Book Depository, so you can get free shipping through there, and you can get it in hardback, ebook, and audio form as well.
Well, thank you so much, Candace, for being on the show. This has been such a fun interview.
Thank you so much. I've had a blast.
That interview was so much fun. I don't know if it was just the energy that Candace was exuding while we were on the recording, but I had so much fun with her. We had such a great time. Obviously, you could hear it in both of our voices. We really enjoyed each other's company, and I'm really excited to see what else comes from Candace. So definitely stay tuned. Her book is out today, you guys. If you're listening to this on release day, go and check out the episode description. It has all of the links that you'll need to find her book on Amazon or her website. Definitely check it out. She's an incredible person, and I'm so excited to see everything that comes from her in the future. So thank you so much, Candace, for being on the show. So next week on Read It with Whiskey, we're going to have Caitlin Denman, and she is the author of She Awakens. This is a debut novel, and since this book has been published, she has filled out this entire series. We're going to dive in about that in the interview. So stay tuned next week for our talk with Caitlin. Talk to you then. You've been listening to an episode of Read It with Whiskey. I'm your host, Laura Juntunen, and I want to personally say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would love to get to know you. Hop on over to Instagram and follow us at Read It with Whiskey. Please chime in on this episode's post, share it on your social media and with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.